The cake now needs to bake 55 to 65 minutes until it tests done, but as you know, we have one in the oven already baking, so we can now make the syrup. And the syrup has the rest of the sugar that normally would be in the cake, so we really need to use that syrup. The syrup consists simply of sugar, orange juice, and Grand Marnier. If you don't want to use the Grand Marnier, add extra orange juice, the same amount as the Grand Marnier that you'd be using. And this just needs to be heated until the sugar dissolves, which normally takes until it comes to almost a boil. The sugar is now completely dissolved. You can see how clear the mixture is and it's bubbling, but I don't want the Grand Marnier to evaporate. So I'm pouring it immediately into a little bowl. It'll be ready to brush on the cake. And now the cake is ready to come out of the oven. The syrup needs to be brushed on just as soon as it comes out because it goes in much more evenly and much more readily. So I place the pan on a rack, and with a cake tester or a metal or wooden skewer, poke lots of holes throughout the entire surface of the cake. There are lots of holes in the cake anyway. That's a normal cake, so cake has a spongy texture, so you don't have to worry about hurting it. And now I'm going to brush the syrup, half of the syrup, on top of the cake. This is a special rose mold that when the cake comes out, it looks like a giant rose with all the convolutions. It's quite amazing. And of course, you can use any kind of tube pan that's 9 or 10 cups. There are many different shapes these days, but obviously the rose is one of my favorites. After you've brushed about half the syrup on the bottom, which is the top right now, but it's going to become the bottom, you can unmold it onto a rack to brush the other side. And as with all cakes with syrups, the syrup is really the most evenly distributed when it's allowed to sit for overnight, 8 hours. And especially with the Grand Marnier, it really preserves it. With one deft motion, lift off the pan, and then you can see that if you've done a good job of preparing the pan, you haven't lost a bit of the crust. It's beautifully browned and it's a full-blown rose. And now if I can manage not to poke it and get the syrup to absorb, I think it's more attractive not to have little bits of crumbs come up from the cake. And don't worry if it pools up a little between the petals, because it will sink in. The cake is hot, the syrup is hot, so it doesn't stand a chance. Now the cake needs to cool. Or if you absolutely can't restrain yourself and want to eat it right away, you have to remove it to a serving plate, or it's a good idea to remove it to a serving plate. So I like to use the bottom of a tart pan, especially a non-stick one, because that's easy to transfer cake layers. Or you could use a pancake turner. Just slip it underneath between the rack, because it's sticky. The cake, you know, the top of the cake, which is now the bottom, has all the syrup on it. So you need something to lift it up, and then place it on your serving plate, and with the other hand push it off and just lift up and lift away the bottom of the tart pan. And if you really want to decorate a little bit, it's nice to use just a touch of powdered sugar. You can see how it sort of comes to life with a little bit of accent of white, although I think it's just perfect the way it was. And fresh flowers also always make a lovely garnish. These little Johnny Jump Up, otherwise known as tiny pansies, they're edible, especially if they're grown without insecticide. Look at all those great chocolate chips suspended through the cake. This is one of my most often requested cakes. You've just got to try it. I'm Levy Beranbaum with Baking Magic.